Okay, so I actually wasn't planning on making another video today, but the book got too good, so I just need to share. I am actually going to start a for real series on this after I'm back from Kansas City, and I'll go like chapter by chapter through the book. But just some more fascinating information about the early days of Islam and the Muslim culture. So last time we talked about how really Islam is used as a military campaign. That is what it is at its core, and something that is becoming so vividly apparent in the history of Islam and the history of the foundations of caliphates and their conquerings across Arabia, the Middle East, North Africa, into Spain and France, and then upwards towards Constantinople and modern day Turkey, is that Islam is changing whatever they need to fit whatever they need. So you see a lot of pacifism and just a lot of claims to nonviolence. So they're coming to these towns and they're like, oh, we won't be violent, we're not going to hurt anyone, we're going to let you keep this, this, and this. You just have to pay us these insane taxes so that we can up our income, and we're pretty much going to occupy you under your occupation. So they're taking over these towns without a doubt, but they're like, we're not here to do that. But essentially they're creating an Islamic empire. And I'm definitely butchering this right now, but what we see is that they're tacking on practices in Islam as a way to also be pacifist with the other religions in the area. So last time we talked about how they are gaining support from Jewish leaders by saying, no, you and me, we both don't like the Christians because the Christians believe Jesus is the king, he's the Messiah. We don't support that. And the Jewish leaders are like, okay, yeah, they're on our side. And so then we see that they start to manipulate those teachings to then flip sides, and they start going, no, you and me Christians, we have the same Moses, we have the same Abraham, like we are on the same team here. And so then they start like being pacifist with Christians, and everything is manipulated as a control tactic so that they can gain control from the Roman Empire and create their own empires. And they're preaching like living good lives and things like that. And some Christians are falling for this belief that, oh yeah, you and me, we're both trying to live good lives. If you're true to Christian doctrine, you know that living a good life does not save you. That is what the Quran preaches. And so and they're talking about God not failing his promises, and then he is. Anyway, there's a lot of contradiction is my point. And so then you move a little bit further along, and this is a quote from the book. I have made this treaty, so this is a leader in Alexandria. I have made this treaty, he declared in his defense, in order to save you and your children. With this, the records of one author writing a century or so later, the Muslims took control of all of Egypt, the south, north, and in doing so, trebled their income from taxes. God was punishing the Christians for their sin, wrote another author at the time. In an almost perfect model of expansion, the threat of military force led negotiated settlements as one province after another submitted to the new authorities, talking about submitting to the Islamic caliphates. And so then naturally, there starts to be this rift within Muslims, and there's the breaking of the khanates and the different sects. So that's where we see the separation of Shia and totally just lost the other sect of Islam. But that's where we see the shift occurring. Because of this shift, rather than it being a pacifist environment where it's like, you know what, we'll tolerate all environments, it starts to become, it's Arab and non-Arab, and if you're not a Muslim, we are going to convert you. And so they're tacking on practices. So they actually are stealing the practices of existing norms on a raft of social practices were adopted by the conquerors, including a number concerning inheritance, dowries, oath, and marriage, as well as fasting. So these are things that we now know today as very, very key components of the Islamic faith, what it is to be Muslim. They stole this as an act to unify their own belief system. This was tacked on in addition to, and they stole this from other people. They're taking on existing norms and social practices of the areas that they're conquering in order to support this religion that they've created. So in and of itself, wild move. They're not original in any capacity. And so then they continue to take this a step further and say, and mind you, Muhammad himself was illiterate. And so after Muhammad has died, that's where a lot of the disagreements are coming in, is within this interpretation. What we really see is that the strife in the Muslim world starts to come over into other areas. So the Mosque of the Dome on the Rock, the first major Islamic sacred building, was constructed at the beginning of the 690s with the intention of diverting attention away from Mecca. So there was a sect of Islam that said, we actually want Jerusalem to be our capital, not Mecca. And so they built this as a weapon for ideological conflict during this period of civil war when the Caliph was taking up arms against direct descendants of the Prophet Muhammad himself. So there's crazy infighting happening now. And then because of the strife within the Muslim world, on the Dome of the Rock, I did not know this is a really cool fact, on both the inner and outer faces of the Dome of the Rock Mosque were aimed at mollifying Christians. The inscriptions read, worship God, compassionate, merciful, and honor and bless his prophet Muhammad, they read. But they also proclaimed that Jesus is Messiah, so believe in God and his envoys. Bless your envoy, the servant Jesus, son of Mary. Peace be on him, the day of his birth and the day of his death, and on the day that he was raised from the dead. So we do know that the Quran says Jesus is the Messiah. However, Islam does not believe that Jesus is divine. So the idea of being the Messiah and divine actually very directly conflicts with Jewish teachings. And mind you, earlier, Muhammad, when he was first getting started, says, you and me, Jew, and the Jewish, says Islam and Judaism go hand in hand because neither of us believes that Jesus is the Messiah. Now we have the Quran outright saying Jesus is the Messiah, which was used to try and manipulate Christians into coming to Islam, and not believing he's divine contradicts what it is to be the Messiah that was prophesied about in Jewish texts and in Christian prophecies. So I'm just gonna keep reading the book's quotes because I'm not doing super great with my words today. But even in the 690s, in other words, there was a blurring of religious boundaries. So close, in fact, did Islam seem that some Christian scholars thought its teachings were not so much that of a new faith, but a divergent interpretation of Christianity. According to John of Damascus, one of the leading commentators at the time, Islam was a Christian heresy rather than a different religion. Muhammad, he wrote, had come up with his own ideas based on the readings of the Old and New Testaments and on a conversation with an errant Christian monk. In spite of this, the relentless jostling for position and authority at the center of the Muslim world, the preferees continue to see astonishing expansion. So they're still using this as a military campaign, but it just goes to show how unstable the Islamic faith has been from the beginning. They stole their values from other cultures so that they could be pacify and take over these regions without too much conflict, only then to have conflict within themselves where they can't identify exactly what they believe, because they're saying Jesus is not divine, but he is the Messiah. But we've also already told the Jewish people that we don't think Jesus is the Messiah. So you just see so much contradiction. And I'm not learned enough in this to quote the Quran, but I have watched others commentate directly to direct heresy within the Quran. And so I think this just goes to show how aloof the religion of Islam has been from the beginning. And no wonder there's so much strife and contradiction even to this day within Islamic practices, because the very foundations of the religion itself have been muddled since the beginning. And It's truly heartbreaking that people are living and dying in name of a religion that A, we know is false, but then B, was never solid. Like, it never had a foundation at all. And it's just truly heartbreaking to read. And then, we're entering the season of conquering, and so we're pushing into the 800s, so we're going to get close to the Crusades here pretty soon. Can't wait to talk about that. Thank you.